Anbernic was once synonymous with quality retro emulation handhelds. Recently though, at least for me, their devices feel like they've started to lag behind. Anbernic was never leading when it came to powerful chipsets, but their devices had great components and each variation of their handhelds offered a new take on portable retro gaming. So enter Anbernic's latest handheld, the RG505. Spec for spec, it's nearly identical to the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, which was also recently released. Does Anbernic's spin on things make it a worthy competitor? We're going to take a deep dive look at the RG505's hardware, software, and gaming performance to answer the question, should you pick up Anbernic's latest gaming handheld? Make sure you're subscribed, and let's get right to it. The RG505 box is nice and slim. Even before we unbox it, the callbacks to Retroid Pocket are here. The box is just so similar even with those little icons tiled across the box. It's not like Retroid's trademarked the design or anything, but it does give us a hint as to just how similar these devices will be. The unboxing is pretty standard. Inside the box is the device. Next to the RG505 is a USB-C charging cable. Underneath the device is where you'll find a short instruction manual, a screen protector, and if you opted to include it in your purchase, the micro SD card preloaded with games. First impressions of the RG505 is that it's a bit heavier than I thought it would. And immediately noticeable is just that massive logo below the screen. It feels comically large. I'm also not sure why, but my device came with this piece of masking tape with writing here. No idea why, but we'll peel it off now. The next immediate thing to point out is that the color of this device is super vibrant and very Switch-esque. It's not a perfect match to my turquoise Switch Lite, but it's pretty close. Specs on the RG505 are going to sound familiar if you just saw my Retroid Pocket 3 Plus video. It's got a Unisoc Tiger T618 CPU, a Mali G52 GPU, 4GB of RAM, 128GB of internal storage, a 5000 mAh battery, and a 4.95-inch OLED touchscreen with a resolution of 960 by 554. Compared to the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, the CPU, GPU, RAM, and internal storage are the same, but the Anbernic RG505 has a slightly larger battery than the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus's 4500 mAh battery. The screen size is slightly larger than Retroid Pocket 3's 4.7-inch IPS touchscreen, which has a resolution of 750 by 1334. We'll go into a deeper screen comparison in a bit. Pricing for the RG505 is just about competitive to Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. The RG505 is just a little pricier, starting at $158. On the other hand, the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus is available for $150 US. Comparing the dimensions of the device to the Retroid Pocket 3 or 3 Plus, the RG505 is both thicker and taller. Controller-wise, we have Anbernic's classic D-pad, which I find to be one of the best-feeling D-pads in the emulation handheld market. The ABXY buttons are in a Nintendo-style layout and have a nice bounce to them. They're easy to press and don't have too much travel to them as well. The analog sticks on the RG505 are Hall sensing. This means they're controlled by magnets instead of the standard method of detecting analog input. This is the first time that we've actually seen the inclusion of Hall sensing analog sticks on an Anbernic device. I'm not sure if this is only my device, but the left analog sticks make some clicking noises when I move it around. This seems to have no impact on the actual usage of the analog stick though. On the front of the device, we also have the start and select buttons on either side. Compared to the Retroid Pocket 3 and 3 Plus, I still prefer those clickier buttons. They are a bit more satisfying for me to use, but Anbernic's rubber membrane buttons do feel really great as well. I'm also happy to see that the start and select buttons are on the face of the device, making them a bit more accessible compared to the Retroid Pocket 3 and Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. The screen on this device is supposed to be one of its standout features. It's the same OLED screen found in the PlayStation Vita, so you can expect deep and rich colors. It's also the same screen we've taken a look at with Anbernic's RG503. The colors are definitely bright and vivid, but resolution-wise, it's not even quite a 720p display. The great thing though about this screen is that at 960 by 544, it's an exact 2x scale of PSP. On the top of the RG505, we have the USB-C charging port and a 3.5mm headphone jack. We also have side-by-side triggers. They are unfortunately not stacked triggers, which I was hoping that we'd see more from Anbernic, since their RG353 did feature stacked triggers. The RG505 has an interesting design choice of dramatically raising the L2 and R2 buttons. They're super clicky sounding, which I really like since I'm a fan of very clicky buttons, but we'll have to see how gameplay is impacted by the design choice for the trigger buttons. On the left side of the RG505 is the volume rocker. The rocker is flush with the device, so it's easy to press while playing, but inset so that you won't have any accidental presses. On the right side of the device are two quick action buttons. The first is a button that functions as a back button, or hold the button to use it as a home button. The second is a quick shortcut to Anbernic's front-end launcher. The only issue I have with these buttons is how nondescript the icons are. Even though I'd been using the device for several hours, I just couldn't remember which button does what. It would have been great if the iconography represented what the button actually did. And finally, looking at the bottom of the device, we've got a power button and the microSD card slot. One thing notably missing from this device is an HDMI out option. HDMI out is not usually something I prioritize with retro emulation devices, but given that the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus does have an HDMI out, it's a bit disappointing that it's not even featured here at all. Powering on the RG505, we've got Android 12 here. Anbernic's Android handhelds have always come with the option to dual boot into Linux, but this time around it's just Android. The default settings on the RG505 are a bit interesting. We've got this anime background which seems very niche and just not for me. I would have preferred just a generic solid color or a gradient background, and if I'm super into anime, change it later. The device also comes preloaded with most of the emulators you'll want to use. I'm a bit disappointed to see that Anbernic preloaded pirated versions of some of these emulators, such as Drastic, the Nintendo DS emulator. One of the biggest software improvements we see with the RG505 is the inclusion of the Google Play Store. This is a first for Anbernic. Their Android handhelds have never shipped with the Google Play Store preloaded. You always need to use a sideloading app or install a community version of Android to get Google Play working. This is a highly welcome change, and I hope it will continue with future Anbernic devices running Android. But it seems with every Anbernic step forward, there seems to be 2 steps backwards. Included on the RG505 is also 2 alternative app stores. I think it's fine if you need to rely on an alternative store for some reason, as long as they don't provide access to pirated apps. But when they're preloaded on this device, I do feel like it's a little bit sketchy. Other software customizations we see are device-specific options in the swipe-down control panel. This is where you can swap between Nintendo button mapping or switch to Xbox button mapping. These settings seem to only apply per session though, and they don't persist through hard reboots. There are a few other toggles you can switch between for different device settings, but to be completely honest, I'm not sure if they actually do anything. I just haven't found that they've had any meaningful impact to performance on my RG505. Compared to Retroid, I think they do a much better job of handling custom settings. In the Retroid Pocket Settings app, you'll find another section dedicated to Retroid-specific settings, and they will persist even after a reboot. Anbernic also included their own game launcher on the RG505. While the launcher has been on previous Anbernic device releases, there just aren't any specific standout features of it. It's incredibly bare bones. If you opted to include the micro SD card from Anbernic, the games will appear in the launcher, but it seems if you have any other folder structure, the Anbernic launcher won't detect the games at all. I tried to click through the settings, but I just found this interface so unintuitive that I kind of just gave up, to be honest. The design of the launcher looks like they took the macOS Tiger background and some stock console icons from the mid-2000s and slapped it on a front-end launcher. My main hope is that this is just the beginning, and we'll see meaningful iterations and updates as Anbernic evolves their devices and front-end launcher. As a quick comparison, the Retroid launcher has been around since the introduction of the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus and has seen meaningful updates ever since. It started out as a minimal and sleek launcher. It keeps the functionality simple, but also allows for more in-depth customization in a fairly intuitive way. For my RG505, I've actually been meaning to try out the Daijisho front end, so I've decided that that's what I'm going to default to on this device. It's a really minimal front end, easy to set up, and most importantly, it's snappy, so you can focus on gaming, not optimizing your Android setup to play those games. I don't usually have a whole section on budget devices and battery performance. They are pretty standard at this point, 4,000 to 6,000 milliamp battery capacity with between 4 and 6 hours of usage per charge. Anbernic's RG505 has a 5,000 milliamp battery, and while compared to the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus it's technically larger, I've actually been having battery issues with my RG505. The battery meter is either never accurate or my battery capacity is severely reduced. I'm never able to get this device above 40%. There have been firmware updates pushed by Anbernic for this device, but none have fixed my battery issue. Is mine defective? Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised. This would actually be my third defective device from Anbernic. My RG552 and my Win600 were both defective. The RG552 came with a broken power button, so I was never even to get the thing powered on. The Win600 died after I added more RAM, and it took Anbernic over 6 months to ship me a replacement after I sent my defective unit back. It's actually why there haven't been any reviews on either of these devices on this channel. By the time I got a working device, there was a new Anbernic thing to swarm on. The RG505 does work fine for me when it's plugged in, but I think it's important to point out this defect. There is a firmware update that's supposed to fix this issue, but it didn't seem to work for me. From doing some research, it sounds like you might need to take apart the device and unplug and replug the battery in, but I don't think that's something that customers should be asked to do just to get their device functioning as advertised. The last comparison I want to make between the RG505 and the Retroid Pocket 3 is screen quality. Looking at the RG505, you can really see how great that OLED panel looks. But once you put the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus next to it, even though it doesn't have an OLED panel, the colors are so deep that you could have told me it's an OLED panel and I would have believed it. The Retroid Pocket 3's resolution is a bit higher and has more pixels per inch, making it an overall crisper appearance. Both are good screens, but I prefer the Retroid Pockets. The other main difference here is that Anbernic's got this huge logo at the bottom, giving this device massive bezels and a Jay Leno-sized chin. Before we get into specific systems and games, I wanted to show you what you will get on the 128GB micro SD card if you feel like paying a little bit extra during the Anbernic checkout screen. I still feel like the extra cost for a low-quality micro SD card and less than stellar game selection is not even worth it. The card is loaded with games, but they aren't named properly, and at least for me, the games are mostly ones that I don't even care about. Same as I've always said, I don't think the preloaded micro SD card is worth the extra few dollars. The micro SD card is filled, but I think it's filled with disappointment. I think it's much better to curate your own personal collection instead. So let's take a look at some gaming performance on the RG505. Starting out easy, all of the classic systems will run great. Nintendo, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, and older arcade games all run great. Genesis also runs really well even with widescreen hacks enabled. Super Nintendo also runs pretty great, even with harder to run games like Yoshi's Island. But I was disappointed to find that for some reason, I just couldn't get Super Nintendo with widescreen patches running well. I was surprised to see this since they ran no problem on the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. PlayStation 1 had no issues and looks great on the RG505. This chipset should be able to handle up to a 6x resolution upscale like the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, but since the screen isn't above a 720p display, I just upscaled it to that point. Whether you choose to play at the native 4:3 aspect ratio with bezels or enable widescreen patches, PlayStation 1 is definitely fun to play on this console. N64 performance is also very good on the RG505. Games like GoldenEye run really well even with widescreen hacks enabled. Some games may require slight tweaks to the emulator profile, but through the handful of games I tried, everything did end up running great. For the most part, you can run PSP well at a 2x upscale. The OLED display does make these games look great, and it's fun to see that the device is a perfect aspect ratio for PSP, so you have no bezels at all. God of War ran mostly okay, but it did have some pretty heavy frame dips and skips at some points. Even at a 1x resolution, it definitely ran better, but it didn't quite run perfectly. I was disappointed that Dreamcast didn't quite live up to my expectations. Most games did seem to run fine, but harder to run games like NBA 2K just wouldn't hit a stable frame rate. I was really surprised to see this because the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus can handle NBA 2K with no problems at all. Jumping into higher-end emulation, let's look at some GameCube. The versions of Dolphin included with the RG505 don't have the tweak to downscale below a 1x resolution. While I don't necessarily like to play games below a 1x resolution, sometimes it is a good option if a game you want to play is just not quite hitting full speed. Mario Kart Double Dash actually seemed to run really well on this device. Wind Waker seemed to perform decent, although I did experience skips and lags here and there. In general though, I just didn't find the selection of games that I'm interested in playable on the RG505. For PlayStation 2, the Aether SX2 emulator is really quite impressive. I find it really easy to get started with PS2 emulation on Android because of this emulator. I found that some games would run at full speed, but others would have dips or just feel like there's too much motion blur for the game to be truly playable. And yet again, this is a system that I found to be more playable on the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus compared to the RG505. With access to the Google Play Store, it opens up our options for Android gaming and game streaming. Unfortunately though, on this device, not by much. Game Pass does run and play fine, but it was weird to play Xbox games with such a low resolution display. Android gaming didn't look bad, but Minecraft had some weird issues that I've never seen on an emulation handheld before. Some buttons were just not recognized, making the game pretty much unplayable. I would also at times not be able to walk full speed, like my character was in slow motion or something. Because of the hassles of this device, I really just didn't feel like it was even worth testing anything beyond this for Android gaming. Unfortunately, Anbernic's RG505 completely misses the mark. It has everything it needs to be a true competitor to the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus, but somehow in nearly every category it falls flat. The RG505 is preloaded with sketchy app stores and pirated emulators, in addition to a low-quality games launcher, all making up a pretty bad software experience. The hardware is also a huge miss for me because of my battery issues that couldn't be resolved even though the firmware update was supposed to fix the problem. In addition, I had that clicky noise on my left analog stick, which brings up the question of overall build quality for this device. Emulation for older games is perfectly fine on this device, but there are plenty of cheaper options out there for those systems. To pick out some positives about this device, I do like the Anbernic D-pad, the ABXY buttons feel good, the start select buttons are in a good spot, and the color of this device is incredibly fun and vibrant. I am glad to see that the Google Play Store was finally included on an Anbernic device without any extra steps or workarounds, and the OLED panel does deliver vibrant colors. But even with those good things, there are just way too many downsides to this device. There is unfortunately just no comparison when stacked up against the Retroid Pocket 3 Plus. For the same price, you get great hardware, great software, and good emulation performance all in a well-designed device. I'll keep holding out for Anbernic to bounce back, but until then, this device is a hard pass. But those are just my thoughts. What do you think of the Anbernic RG505? Are you looking forward to any new Anbernic devices, or have they also let you down recently? Let me know in the comments what you're looking for in the perfect handheld emulation device. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. Make sure you're subscribed for more videos, and thanks for watching.